Good evening. I would like to call to order our meeting today for the Allegheny County Board of Education, Tuesday, September 13th, 2022, at 5:05 p.m. At this time, please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We'd like to ask everyone to bow your heads for a moment of silence in honor of Neil Grove, the chief of IT who passed away this past month. Thank you. We have our new student board member with us for this school year, Miss Carly Kleiss from Mountain Ridge, and we'd like to welcome her, and if you would like to say a few things.
Good evening. Is that working? Yeah, okay. Good evening. My name is Carly Kleiss. I'm a senior at Mountain Ridge. I am a member of the soccer and softball team. Plan on running track as well. And I am interested in pursuing medicine, but I'm very excited to be the board member this year, and I'm very glad that I'll be able to represent my fellow students at the board, and I'm very excited about this. Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you, Ms. Kleiss. At this time, Mr. Llewellyn will read closed session summaries for executive sessions held on August 9th, 2022.
The Allegheny County Board of Education met in closed session at 3:30 p.m. on August 9th, 2022 at Central Office. The purpose of the closed session was to consult with legal counsel, discuss personnel matters, and to engage in administrative function. All 5 board members were present, and the vote to meet in executive session was unanimous. The topics discussed were personnel recommendation, Greenway Avenue cell tower contract, superintendent goals, settings and evaluation, school employee updates, and mental health employee updates.
Thank you, Mr. Llewellyn. First, we have our consent agenda. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda as read?
Motion to approve the consent agenda.
Motion by Mr. Farrow. Is there a second? Second by Ms. Frank. All those in favor? Passes unanimously. Thank you. And moving on to our superintendent's report, first we have a school safety employee update by Mr. Rumgay.
Good afternoon. A year ago at this time, we had 5 full-time school security employees and 5 school resource officers from the area's law enforcement agencies assigned to our schools. As of today, we have 14 school security employees and 6 school resource officers. I'd like to take a quick moment to describe the backgrounds of our school security employees. These officers bring many years of desirable experience and a unique skill set that has been developed over the course of their prior employment that I feel makes our team one of the best in the state. Some of our officers are prior SWAT team members, detectives, undercover agents, school resource officers. They have received training in building security, have received defensive tactics trainings, truth and deception, interview techniques, and collectively hundreds of hours of yearly in-service training covering a variety of law enforcement related topics. As a team, they offer quality experience and knowledge to our program, and we are fortunate to have such qualified and dedicated employees. All of our security employees are certified special police commissioned officers. To obtain the certification, one must retire in good standing from their previous employer and complete an 80-hour training course. They also each have attended an 80-hour school resource officer school that allows them to be certified by the state. All have recently taken an active shooter training taught by members of the Frostburg State University Campus Police Department. There is a law enforcement presence in all our schools on a daily basis on specific needs such as school population, location, and special events, which are some of the factors in placement of a school security employee. Daily communication takes place with local police who are able to keep me updated on situations that are taking place in real time in the areas of our schools, as well as current crime trends in Allegany County. School safety is a team effort, and every employee of ACPS is a part of it. Our motto is, if you see something, say something. The officers in our buildings are available to listen to any employee or parent who wants to say something, and students as well. Principals and administrators do a great job making sure that the guidelines and best practices are met. I want to thank them for keeping school safety on the forefront. In closing, school safety in Allegany County is strong due to the diverse expertise and experience of our school security employees and the support we receive from our local law enforcement agencies. This program would not be where it is today had it not been for the result of aggressive, proactive decisions made by the predecessors of this position, previous and current administration, and the board for having the vision of doing what it takes to ensure that all students and employees of Allegany County schools are safe. That's it.
Yes, Ms. Frank.
I just wanted to thank you, Mr. Rumgay, because I know the challenge of filling positions. To go from 10 total school safety personnel to 20 is remarkable in a small community like this. So hats off to you and your team for filling those spots.
Thank you, ma'am.
Mr. Farrow.
Mr. Rumgay, are there other, I know you had what Ms. Frank said. It's tough finding those people because I've been in those shoes. Are there other people out there that you have talked to, or we could look to maybe in the year, hire some more folks that are available to do the training or are available to fill these positions?
I would say that there's applicants out there. At this time, I feel that we're adequate in coverage. That's definitely something that I would like to consider it in the future. I'd like to also add that Frostburg City Police and all three police agencies also have additional officers that work grand overtime. So in addition to the numbers that we have on a daily basis, we also have additional officers working overtime in the schools. So that's another probably 5 to 6 officers daily that we have in the schools.
Well, I guess maybe, are there other guys out there that are retiring that you're going to see in the next couple months, or that would be available? Would we be able to hire them? Would you have a position for them?
Yes and yes. If the positions are available and we can go forward on it, it would be something that I would definitely consider. The first part of your question, yes, there are people retiring every day from law enforcement, now more than years past.
Okay, thank you.
I think one of the questions we'd have to review and to go over, obviously we have to talk with Mr. McKenzie and build that towards a budget. And I know that finding the candidates, to your point, that you are recommending, we have to, even though we have many people apply, they have to meet your requirements. I just want to be clear on that, our standards will continue to be as high as they've been. So,
Correct.
What I'm sharing is I know that there will be a turnover here eventually with our SSEs, and as they retire, finding other bodies. So I think that's something we'll consider and try to move forward with. I don't want to say that we'll be able to do that completely, because I know we had a difficult time in the beginning, and then we had a influx, and that may change. We just don't know how many candidates we'll have each time and if they meet the qualifications. So in an ideal world, yes, but I want to make sure that when we know how many are leaving and how many candidates we have that meet your requirements, before we say we're going to take that step, we have to make sure that all those boxes are checked. Is that kind of accurate, what I'm sharing?
Correct. That's accurate.
So it's yes, if we can.
I guess that's to what you're saying. I agree with, we need to talk to Mr. McKenzie. We need to see, if the money's available, but I would like to have Mr. Rumgay be able to, if he finds a good candidate, to be able to hire that with the thought that we are going to have a turnover, with the thought that we still have a couple schools. And I've heard from a couple of schools this year that we placed, that you've placed people in, that they're Allegany, Fort Hill, they're all elated. Braddock and Washington, and they're tickled to death with the new people that they have, and the teachers and some of the parents and everything have contacted me, and they're tickled about that. But I would like to see it that if you find a good qualified employee, that you're able to hire that person with the thought that we have a placement for him, but with also the thought that if someone does become ill, retire, whatever, in the middle of the year, that we have the backfill available for that position. So however we need to do that, that's what I'd like to see happen. Do I need to put that in form of a motion?
I guess the issue, Mr. Farrell, is what you're talking about would probably require a budget amendment, because you've budgeted for, as I recall, you budgeted for the number of positions hired. So
We budgeted for several more, and then however many we could find at the time. So again, it may be easy, it may be doable. I just, without having the conversation with Mr. McKenzie, and we could move.
you could ask the superintendent to look into it and get back get back to you.
Yeah, I think that's probably the way I want to go, is ask Mr. Blank to look into it
That's fine.
with Mr. McKenzie to see if we have the money. If we do, be able to move in that direction if we need to. Thank you.
That works.
Any other questions or comments for Mr. Rumgay? Thank you, Mr. Rumgay. We appreciate your time. Thank you. Okay, Ms. Deborah Matheny will be presenting on behalf of Dr. Welsh for the mental health update, and then also staying to discuss the restraint and seclusion.
So for mental health, we had 10 mental health specialists at the end of last year, and those are our certified social workers and licensed professional counselors. We were looking to add one additional position for this school year. However, we had 3 candidates who we felt met the criteria we were looking for, and so we did add an additional 3 for a total of 13. One of those does have specialty in addictions, and so that was a nice addition to our staff. So we now have 13 mental health specialists. None serve more than 2 schools. So we've been able to drastically reduce the caseloads with the increasing number of specialists that we're able to hire. In addition to the mental health specialists, we were also able to add, on a pilot basis, 3 additional school counseling positions as well. So we are increasing our number of providers available to provide mental health support to our students.
Yeah, I'd like to add, we were very excited to find the mental health employees that we did with what they bring to the table. It was again, a difficult task to find, and when we had more than one available, we approached the board, and fortunately they allowed us to do that. They've made a huge impact in our system, and with the pilots, with the other positions also. So we're excited in both the SSE areas and the mental health areas. So.
Yes, Ms. Frank?
I just wanted to thank you, just like I did with Mr. Rumgay, you and Dr. Welsh. This has been an important issue, both school safety and mental health, for this board, as long as I've been on this board. And I know the challenges that you've had trying to fill positions in a small community. So bravo, to have 13 and nobody assigned to more than 2 schools. That's making a serious impact with our students. And I applaud you for that. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank the board for your prioritization of mental health.
Any other questions for Ms. Matheny before she moves on, assuming you're ready? Yes.
I am, yes. Thank
Okay.
you. The other presentation I need to give this evening is on restraint and seclusion. The Maryland State Department of Education has asked each county to present to their local board on our restraint and seclusion numbers and our procedures. And so I'm going to do that this evening. And so when we're talking about restraint, we are talking about a personal restriction that immobilizes or reduces the ability of an individual to move their arms, their legs, their torso, or their head freely. And so this type of restraint can only be implemented by a staff member who's had all the elements of training as required by COMAR. It is only used in instances when we have a child who's in imminent danger of injuring themselves or someone else. And we currently have teams in every school that are trained to provide restraint. We have 3 staff members in each building trained. In the buildings where we have self-contained programs for special education, we have 5 staff members. And so they're trained yearly in addition to the training on the restraint holds, which is done by Crisis Prevention Institute, CPI. They're also trained on trauma interventions as well as CPR and first aid. And so our training is all up to date. Physical restraint does not include things like holding a student to calm them down, holding their hand, moving a disruptive student who's unwilling to leave an area, or breaking up a fight. Those things would not be considered restraint. Any child who has a restraint is immediately checked by a school nurse, and parents are notified right away that it's occurred, and it's very well documented what led up to the restraint and then what happened afterwards. So we keep all of that documentation. Seclusion is a different definition. It's the confinement of a student alone in a room, an enclosure, or any space from which the student is prevented from leaving. And it does not mean a behavior intervention plan of separating a student by placing the student in an unlocked room from which they can leave. That's not seclusion. Or a separate location in a classroom from which they can leave. That is not seclusion. So seclusion is truly placing a child in a room for which they cannot leave. Allegany County has only had 1 room that we've used as a seclusion room at South Penn Elementary School, so that is the only location seclusion was occurring. And again, these are children who are escalated to the point of they could injure themselves, and so the seclusion area was an area for them to calm down and not become injured. The Department of Justice has 94 open investigations for discrimination based on restraint and seclusion in elementary and secondary schools in the United States. There are open investigations in 31 states and Washington, D.C. There was a recent investigation in 2021 in Frederick County. It was news. You may have heard about this investigation. And it was found that their school system discriminated against students with disabilities and pervasive noncompliance of ADA in regards to restraint or seclusion. And as a result of that investigation, the Maryland State Department of Education has instituted a top-to-bottom review of seclusion and restraint policies. And so we have provided ours to MSDE for approval. They've committed to taking active measures to prevent illegal and discriminatory use of restraint, as of course has our county. They believe, as does Allegheny County, that students should be in a safe school environment to learn and thrive. And all students, including those with disabilities and students of color, are treated fairly and equitably throughout the state. So those are MSDE's goals in regards to restraint and seclusion. So they've collected data on restraint and seclusion incidents in Maryland. You see the column far to the right is the year prior to the pandemic, 2018-19. So in that year, there were 29,245 incidences of restraint and seclusion in Maryland. The first column is 2021, and that was during the pandemic. Our county was only open 3 months, so those numbers are very deflated. They're currently in the process now of collecting numbers for last school year, the 21-22. The 21 report for MSDE highlighted that students with emotional disabilities and autism were by far the groups that were restrained and secluded the most. Many more boys than girls. Middle and high school had the highest incidence of restraint, and elementary and high the highest incidence of seclusion. This is our preliminary data. It has not been finalized, but it is the numbers that we are submitting to MSDE for 21-22. We had 25 incidences of restraint in Allegheny County last school year. It's important to note that the state collect individual restraint incidences, but this is 12 children represented here because some children had to be restrained more than one time during the school year. In all 25 instances, the student was male. In looking at the racial makeup, 10 were 2 or more race, 15 were white, as classified when they registered for school. 19 of the restraints were a student who received special education services, 13 had a code of autism, and 13 were also in a self-contained special education environment. So just like the state data, we are higher for males, higher for children who have special needs, and higher for children who have autism and also emotional disabilities. The data for seclusion. Our county made the decision to end seclusion on January 1st, 2022. So as of that date, we no longer were using seclusion as a practice at South Penn Elementary School. But prior to that, we had 38 instances of seclusion, and again, those were only 4 children represented. And because of that low number, I'm not going to report data that may identify them, but that was the number that we had as of January 1 when we ended this practice. Our staff at that time was trained in what's called ikuru, which is a different method of calming down a student or de-escalating a student, and so we're using that in lieu of a seclusion room. So there was legislation passed in 2022, House Bill 1255 and Senate Bill 705. It was passed unanimously in the House and Senate. Physical restraint remains legal in Maryland when it is deemed necessary to protect a student against imminent serious physical harm, and other interventions have failed or have been deemed inappropriate for the student, and that is the practice that we have always followed. It's only to prevent a student from harming themselves or others. With this new legislation, however, seclusion is banned in public schools in Maryland. And if a student is physically restrained 10 times or more in a school year, the public school has to report that to MSDE no longer than 4 business days after the student's 10th incident of restraint. And at that time, our central office is responsible for reviewing the student's case, including the circumstances of each incident. We're required to assess the school's pattern of behavioral interventions to evaluate whether less restrictive interventions could have been used and share those recommendations to MSDE. And so our staff will be going through this year's training on October 3rd. At that time, we're rolling out an electronic data submission form, so all of this data will be collected in real time So we'll be able to monitor that and be in compliance with this new law. And so that's our procedure and policy for moving forward in regards to restraint. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have.
You mentioned what's being done in lieu of seclusion. I didn't hear the name of that, and could you explain that a little bit?
It's called ikuru. I think it is a Japanese term. It's used at the Grafton School, and they trained our staff at South Penn and also at Cache Valley, where we have a larger number of children with autism, in this new strategy. It helps to de-escalate a student's behavior. We use things like blocking pads for staff because the students are often at that point very escalated. They're striking out, they're hitting. We've trained staff then in ways to keep themselves safe. And it has been successful to this point. And as I said, it was a very small number of children that we were using that with, but it has been very successful.
Are there any other questions for Mrs. Matheny? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Yes, next on the agenda was a testing update. Dr. Caldwell, we've been talking about, we don't have that much data back from the state at this point. So we had it on the agenda in case we were able to do a presentation, but we would rather have more data to be able to rather than doing it a number of times, we'll wait until we get more back from MSDE to give you an update on the testing. So we're going to skip over the Mrs. Simpson's instructional report on testing tonight.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Blank. Moving on, under hearing of constituents, we did not have anybody signed up to speak this evening, so we will move directly into new business. And first, we have the review of attendance policy regulation, and I will turn it over to Mr. Llewellyn.
Yeah, before you, attendance policy regulation, JEDR1. There was a bill that passed this past legislative session, that requires that we treat behavioral health needs of students, that excuse for attendance, the same as we would for any physical illness. So we're adding, we brought it to policy committee, we've added language that mirrors, if you look on your first page, if you look at F2, it talks about what we do for illness of a student, F2 and F3. And if you turn the page, you'll see the highlighted language which is added, that we've mirrored the illness, the physical illness, for behavioral health needs. In other words, if a student is absent from school because of a behavioral health need, that excuse is treated the same as if they had called and said they had a physical illness. And of course, the requirements for documentation also mirror what we do for physical illness. Also, the law required that when school staff receive notification of an absence because of a behavioral health need, school staff are then to provide the student or their parent or guardian, as appropriate, information about behavioral health, community behavioral health resources. Finally, the other change is on the next to last page, and it's just, this has nothing to do with the change in the law, but this reflects what's becoming a practice for trying to get students to have better attendance, and that is the use of individualized student contracts. Because this is a regulation, it's before the board for review, so unless the board wants to send it back to policy committee for further changes, then this will become effective immediately.
Are there any questions regarding the regulations? Okay, we can move forward then to first reading of the volunteer policy.
You have before you a new draft policy, IJOC. This is a policy for background checks of certain volunteers. This was brought to policy committee. I think it was like one that was been on the list for a long time, but by personnel. And we were trying to find the happy medium for what do we do with parent and other volunteers who have access to students outside of the supervision of our staff who have had a background check. So we've created, the policy committee worked on this multiple meetings, created definitions for different types of volunteers. We have school-based volunteers, we have chaperones. And then we, if you look at the policy statement, we state it's just a matter of policy who is required to successfully pass a background check before they can begin volunteering. Obviously, if a volunteer is coming in to read to a classroom, they would not need a background check because they're being supervised by school personnel. But if you have an overnight trip, for example, then we're going to need those folks to get some sort of background check as determined by, the extent of that will then be determined by the Department of Human Resources, because what we discussed is there are different levels of background checks that we can do. I mean, you can do a full-fledged FBI background check, which we may not do for somebody, but that would be determined by Human Resources, the level we need. So, Policy Committee recommends passage. This is first reading, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Is there a motion regarding volunteer policy IJOC?
Motion to approve. Second.
Motion by Mr. Farrell, second by Dr. Bond. Any questions regarding the policy? Okay, all those in favor? Passes unanimously. Thank you. At this time, can I have a motion to meet in executive session on October 11th, 2022 as necessary?
So moved.
Motion by Dr. Bond,
Second.
second by Mr. Farrell. All those in favor? Passes unanimously. Moving on to our reports. First up is our student board member, Ms. Kleiss.
We will be bringing back the student council picnic, which will be held on September 22nd, which is the Thursday. And so we've been working with the ACPS to bring together activities that will incentivize students to, do icebreakers and to talk with one another. So we've been setting up a couple different stations for that. We're going to have food. Everything's been cleared for that. So we should be all good to roll with that and to see how everything's going in the schools.
Thank you, Ms. Kleiss. Are there any other board member updates? Wow, guys, it's 5:32. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Motion by Mr. Farrell, second by Dr. Bond. All those in favor? Unanimous. All right. Have a good
think
evening,
that's a
everyone.
record.
Thank you. I think it is a record.